From Fact to Fiction. The Allegory in Dance. Hannah Deakin's Pavement. Octograms. The end came in the hollow hours of the night. It began with a long, agonizing groan of timber, followed by a thunderous crash that shook the foundations of the hall. Tartar, the family dog, went into a frenzy, his barks echoing through the dark corridors as the house exhaled a weight it had carried for nearly 300 years. When Hannah Deakin entered the room in the first grey light of a summer dawn, the air was thick and smoky with floating lime dust that dried her throat. It was a ghost of a room. On the floor lay the shattered remains of old Sir Rowland's intricate plasterwork. These complex octograms, composed of 8 lozenges, had been installed over 250 years ago during the intellectual fever of the 1550s. The collapse was more than a domestic disaster. It was a diplomatic crisis. Her cousin, the second Viscount Hill, was now the titular head of the dynasty, the first Viscount, the great Waterloo hero, having passed only recently. The new Viscount was constantly sending grand tour visitors down from the heights of Hawkstone to Soulton to witness the ancestral seat. Hannah had only just yesterday managed to usher out a German prince and his retinue, but more guests were already on the road. With a key part of the meaning of the family legacy literally crumbling at her feet, a solution was needed promptly. The language of that logic had not been lost. Hannah understood it well, but this antique Tudor way of showing it was no longer the fashion. They were living in an age of classicalism that had become repetitive and derivative. It was a period that preferred things to look superficially Greek or Roman, rather than exploring ideas in a playful, local, and distinctive way. The mid-Victorian eye was often blind to the Saxon revival or the organic depth of the Gothic, seeing only old-fashioned clutter where Hannah saw a profound heritage. To the local builders, the fallen ceiling was merely a mess, a style of finish that no one cared to replicate in an age that valued mimicry over the deep, thinking geometry of the past. As the sun rose, the curious red, tilted square leaded lights of the windows began to rake the room with crimson beams. In the dust-heavy air, these beams did not meet, but they hung like glowing measurements. Hannah knew very well they were there to make it easy to visualize where the lines would intersect if the logic shown in the glass was being followed truly. She had had the mathematics explained to her. She knew these shapes were slices through a rhombic dodecahedron. She thought of John Weaver, the great Shrewsbury dancing master who had taught her grandmother. Weaver had understood that movement was merely geometry in motion, a discipline of the highest order. In his An Essay Towards an History of Dancing, he had noted, "Our judges, great councillors and statesmen, as well as the ancient senators at some peculiar times, dance. Plato in his Commonwealth would have dancing schools." Hannah realized that the octograms were that very cadence frozen in plaster since the days of the first Elizabeth. But she also knew the weight of what she was preserving. Dancing was a resource of power, and like the geometry itself, it could be a double-edged sword. Weaver had warned, "Though dancing be a pleasant and innocent recreation when modestly used, yet may it, and so may the most holy things, be perverted and made a property of ill designs." Since the house could no longer hold that 250-year-old geometry above their heads, and with the Viscount's guests imminent, she reached a resolution. She would lay a pebble mosaic. If the pattern was bedded into the earth, it could never fall again. With her young children, Lydia, Grace, and Rose, playing in the dust at her feet, Hannah reached for the farm account books of the last decade. Using the sturdy pages to draw out the meticulous notation, she discarded several sheets marred by mistakes, refusing to stop until the logic of the Tudor ancestors was perfect once more. She planned to use white quartz to pick out the routes traveled by the dancers, the bright stone acting as a map of Weaver's regular movement. By shading different sections of the same stone, she would reveal the hidden three-dimensional depth of the dance within the flat pavement. Standing in the raking red light, Hannah finally cut out her finished design and sent for Mr. Lewis the mason. The ceilings of 1550 had fallen, but she was anchoring their legacy in the ground of 1847. She was burying the old wisdom in the floor, ensuring that when the next wave of visitors arrived, every step they took in the hall would be a rehearsal of the sharp-minded technology of her ancestors. Epilogue: The Geometry of Memory. In his play, Arcadia, Tom Stoppard presents us with a world where the past and the present dance across the same floor, separated only by time. He shows us that while the classical garden of order may be replaced by the picturesque chaos of the modern, the underlying mathematics, the hidden patterns of nature, remain. Like Stoppard's characters, we find that the lost knowledge of a previous century is often just waiting to be rediscovered by those with the eyes to see it. History is rarely a straight line. It is more often a pattern that fades in one place only to be retraced in another. In this installment of our Fact-to-Fiction series, we step away from the dry archives of 1847 to explore a moment of architectural and cultural crisis at Soulton. Much like the teenage genius Thomasina Coverley sketching her new geometry in the margins of a tutor's book, Hannah Deakin found herself standing in the wreckage of a collapsed ceiling, realizing that the thinking technology of the 1550s was not gone. It had simply changed state. While the dialogues and specific internal reflections are narrative reconstructions, they are grounded in the documented reality of the hall's structural evolution. We use this dramatic lens to unlock the motivations of Hannah, a woman standing between the fading logic of the Renaissance and the rigid classicism of the Victorian era. I am particularly indebted to Birger Genicht, whose scholarly consultation has allowed us to accurately revisualize how the internal spaces of Soulton were articulated and understood during these shifting historical phases.